Greetings. I think that actually worked. Now I'm babbling at nobody for a moment. I'll babble incoherently for a few seconds to see if this is actually working and if people are randomly showing up. I have titled this Facebook Live Interviewing Serial Killers, just to confuse people. In a few minutes, you'll know why I called it that. I'm not actually interviewing a serial killer, so don't get your hopes up too much. I will dive in. Okay, there's some people diving on, so I'm just going to start right now. There are lots and lots of voluntarists and anarchists who are constantly frustrated and annoyed talking to statists because they feel like they're bashing their head against a brick wall. And as a result of that, Amanda and I made the seminar called Candles in the Dark. I like dropping little tidbits of hints and suggestions from that as separate little things. If you want the whole freaking story, the whole 2-day course, then get to Candles in the Dark in Fort Worth on September 28th and 29th. That will probably be the last time it happens in the US. We will be recording that one and making that into an online version. And anybody who goes to that one will get a free copy of the online version when it's done. So that's, you can go to attendcandles.com to get that. Every time we put on one of these events, some new little thing or some new little analogy or some new little way to explain something happens, and it gets added to the program. And one that just came up, it occurred to me like while I was doing the last one in Las Vegas. So I added a little thing about it, and I wanted to do a short little blurb about it now. And then you'll know why I called this Interviewing Serial Killers. When a voluntarist talks to somebody, some normal person who believes in government and statism and authoritarian political garbage and all that, they often get frustrated, and they're like trying to convince the other person to believe this and give up their notion of law and authority and statist aggression and all that fun stuff. And it's annoying and frustrating, and the other person usually gets frustrated, and the anarchist gets frustrated, and nobody's hearing anybody. And the problem is, if you go into any discussion psychologically invested in changing their mind, you're going to come across as desperate and sort of evangelical. Like, I need you to agree with me. And it's unfortunate because this is such an important issue. Like, statism is the root cause of the vast majority of injustice in the world. So it does matter a lot, and it's completely understandable to care about it a whole lot. But the more you care about it, the more likely you are to be in evangelical mode. And that's one of the main themes of Candles in the Dark, is learning how to not be in that mode. And one of the little tricks, this is just one thing that occurred to me as a way to explain it. Imagine that instead of talking to this person to try to convince them of something or change their mind or make them agree with you, you're just interviewing them to find out what they really believe and what makes them tick and who they really are and what they really care about and all that stuff. So I would compare it to if you had a chance to interview some serial killer. Like, you know full well that going in there and screaming at them and telling them how horrible they are, they're still going to be a psycho when you're done. You're not going to fix them. You're not going to solve anything. And you might say, I don't want to do that at all. That's creepy and pointless. But to me, I would take the opportunity to learn from them. In other words, I will be in investigator mode to learn what is going on inside their head. Obviously, it's deranged and demented, and what they do is evil and psychotic and all that. That's not the point. The point is to understand the workings going on inside their head. And if you get into that mindset, if you get into the mindset of somebody who's going in to interview a serial killer, then you're not going to be invested in, well, by the time I'm done talking to him for 15 minutes, he'll be a swell member of society. That's not going to freaking happen. He'll still be a psycho, and you have no intention of changing that. Here's the ironic part. When it comes to the average statist, who is not a hopeless psycho, if you go in with no intention of changing their mind and just trying to bring out of them, using the right questions, and that's what we focus on in Candles in the Dark, bring out of them what they really believe and what they really care about and what their priorities are and what their values are and what their moral code is. If you do it in interview form where you're just trying to learn from them about them, your chances of changing their mind are way, way, way higher. In other words, if you're trying to change their mind, you won't. If you're not trying to change their mind, you probably will. And it's one of many counterintuitive things that we teach in Candles in the Dark, because as you've probably experienced yourself, if you're a voluntarist or an anarchist, the way we naturally talk and the way we naturally communicate doesn't work well when you're challenging someone's paradigm about anything. If you're saying something fundamentally different from what they believe and what they've always believed, they naturally go into defensive mode and put a wall up and think that we're in combat because you're the weird outside ideas that I don't want, infecting my brain. And that's just how it works. And it's kind of unfortunate. I wish people were more just rational and reasonable, and you could just explain the logic and they'd go, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, now I changed my mind. That doesn't happen. And we know that doesn't happen. Anybody who's a voluntarist who's tried to talk to statists can see the responses are not coherent or rational or anything. And the reason for that is not because they don't have the capacity to be rational. It's because the moment you trigger their self-defense mechanism by making them feel like you're attacking who they are and what they believe and the paradigm, the way they've always seen the world, they go into combat mode almost automatically, which will naturally make you go into combat mode too, because then you're like, no, this is right, you're wrong, and let me tell you why. And the problem with that is it doesn't accomplish anything most of the time. Now, incidentally, I totally do combat debating online, but it's never for the sake of the person I'm talking to. It's for the sake of spectators who are in a neutral enough position that they can just watch and go, oh, yeah, there's a point and there's a point. And like, they're not the ones on the spot feeling defensive and emotional. But if you can train yourself to be in interview a serial killer mode, you will find that your lack of trying to change their mind makes it so they will actually hear you, especially if you're doing it in the form of questions. All you're doing is asking them what they think. So they know, they know they're engaged. They know the conversation is about them. And if you're in monologue, lecture, preachy mode, they know it has nothing to do with them. You're just making noises in their direction, hoping that whoever the noises hit are, they're going to change their mind. They don't care. They don't have a reason to care because the discussion is not about them. You're just some foreign ideas hitting them in the face in a way that they know you don't care about them and you're not even wondering what they think and you haven't done anything to find out what they think. So that's just one little mental trick. A lot of Candles in the Dark is basically using mental tricks on yourself to make you not fall into the groove of causing an argument. Because their psychology, the psychology of the average statist, just the psychology of the average human being, is predictable enough that you can learn methods that will make all these things not trigger. Like, I've heard so many voluntarists say, I've tried everything, I've tried everything. I lay it all out, and my cousin or my, coworker or whatever it is, they're just too dumb. They just can't understand it. I just totally give up. And the thing is, we focus so much on philosophy and logic, we fail to notice that philosophy and logic is not what makes people believe what they believe. Psychology and indoctrination is what makes people believe what they believe. And to get past that and around that so that logic and evidence actually matter, you need to understand how human psychology works and all the things that are in the way, all the things that are in between your mind and their mind that are making them not hear what you're saying, because that is the problem. And I see it all the time. And again, I learned this by accident. I've been an anarchist for 23 years now. I learned this by doing it the wrong way for 23 years and slowly over time noticing the patterns of, their brains will always react with that thing. It's irrational, it's nonsensical, it's goofy. Why do they do that? Is there some way to get them to not have that bizarre response. And there is, but it takes training yourself. And that's mostly what Candles in the Dark is about, is training yourself to not do things that are going to make the other guy go into defensive mode. And so one of the little tricks is the interviewing a serial killer mindset, where you're not trying, you really are just trying to figure out, what does this person really care about? How do they see the world? And when you're bringing out of them their statism, you're not like fighting against it or trying to talk them out of it. You just really want to know, what have they thought about? How do they view it? How do they view law? Do they think it's okay? What parts have they never thought about before? You know, you're really just, you're like in investigator mode. I want to all the way know a full, clear picture of what's going on inside this person's head. And weirdly, you'll find that while in investigator mode, that's where you do the most good, which is very counterintuitive, because it's like, I'm not trying to put anything in their head yet. I'm just trying to find what's in there already. And you will find that the vast majority of useful communication with statists comes just when you're trying to find what's in their head. And the reason that's the case is because when you're politely asking them questions, not judgmental, not telling the serial killer how evil he is, just trying to find out how their brain sorts things out and how their brains process things, and you're not threatening to them, and then you're not accusatory and you're not insulting, they're trying to answer. And in the process, they're trying to figure out what's going on inside their own head. And I can tell you, the grand total number of statists who actually understand what goes on inside their own head is 0. None of them understand how their own statist belief system works, because the moment they do, they're anarchists. Because the moment you actually understand the inherent contradictions and the convoluted mess that is required to believe in an external authority at all, you stop believing in it. So really, the entire process, and the entire process of Candles in the Dark, is to help somebody look at their own thought process until they realize, this isn't what I am, this isn't what I believe, I have to sort this out, these don't match. And all you're there to do is ask the right questions that let them find that and deal with it. So the one way in which my interviewing a serial killer analogy is bogus is that if you're interviewing a serial killer, the likelihood that you're going to fix them is 0. If you're interviewing a statist and someone who believes the political mythology they were taught, the likelihood that you will have a positive impact if you do these methods right and train yourself to do them is pretty damn close to 100%. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that in 5 minutes they're going to go, hey, I was wrong about everything I ever thought, now I'm an anarchist. It does mean they will actually hear you, and you will have a calm, reasonable discussion with them where it's actual back and forth. It isn't putting up walls and screaming at each other and throwing rocks over the walls. They will actually hear you. They will actually engage. So I guess that's about all I needed to rant about. But again, what will probably be the final Candles in the Dark happening in the U.S. There's another one that's going to happen at Anarchapulco down in Mexico in February. But the last one will be September 28th and 29th. It's in just a few weeks. And to get tickets for that, you can go to attendcandles.com. And that's all set up, and you can see more information about it there. Because it's so, like, I know tens of thousands of people who are voluntarists right now, and they've gone to the effort to understand the philosophy and the logic and all these things, but the vast majority haven't bothered to go to the effort to learn about psychology, without which you can't get through to most of mankind, because their psychology combined with your psychology is going to make communication crash into a wall and become useless. I know it's annoying. It would be nice if you could just explain the logic and the principles and the concepts and the issues and be done. The human brain doesn't work that way. You need to understand the psychology and how to get around it, including his own psychology gets in the way of communicating properly and usefully with statists. So I guess that's enough of our rant for now. I can throw the link somewhere in the description or something. for getting tickets. But you can also, even if you don't go, you can try that little trick when talking to statists. Just go into interview a serial killer mode and see how much more you can learn about what they think, and see how much more open they are to actually communicating with you when you approach it that way.